So one thing I also wanted to make sure that you understand is that, as you may have noticed in the rebuild in the video where I changed the water block, I actually came across a problem with the PCIe riser cable, and I had to spontaneously decide to revert to the original 3.0 PCIe cable, just because the new one that I bought was actually not fitting. It was too long and too wide and didn't fit into the case. And interestingly, and you can see it here on my screen, I noticed that actually there is a big drop of the performance of especially the graphics performance. You can see here 2D mark 812. In my previous runs it would actually be much higher, so as high as roughly 1100. So this drop is actually very significant. But moreover, really in the 3D, I mean, we are talking between 25 and 45%. Not sure exactly where it comes from, but in this run, actually, what I noticed is that in the adrenaline driver, you can see that SAM, the Smart Access Memory feature, where the GPU can basically connect directly with the CPU, sharing resources, it was disabled because somehow it's related to the CSM module, the compatibility support module that you can enable in the BIOS. It was, for some reason, required so that the GPU would correctly boot. And in turn, because it's disabled, the SAM feature, the performance dropped even further. So my hope is that with the newly bought and acquired PCIe 4 cable that hopefully fits, being from Thermaltake, so the manufacturer of the case, I really hope that it can get back closely to the original scores when the old block was mounted directly in the horizontal position directly to the mainboard. But hopefully I can get closer to that, maybe disable the CSM, enable SAM again, and then really get back to the original heights of the performance of my machine. That would be certainly appreciated. Another thing that was quite interesting for me is that with the PCIe 3 cable, the memory performance actually increased, which is a bit strange to see. But it also reminded me of some earlier overclocking tests in the past, where if I reduced actually the overclock of the GPU, then the RAM performance would go up. And I'm now thinking that it might actually be related to the fact that both the GPU, the CPU, and obviously the main board and the RAM, they share part of the board components. I mean, the protocol, the PCIe Express communication, and obviously the hardware behind it, obviously they are all connected, so it's probably just logic that there is this dependency, and that you influence with the overclocking of a certain component. You do also influence the Infinity Fabric, for example, the base for the memory clock, and therefore influence all the other components that are dependent on this thing. So yeah, I just wanted to mention it, and as we are also looking here at my comparison of performance, I can really highly recommend that if you are tinkering with your hardware, if you try to get the best out of things, make sure that after each change you actually document what changes you have made, because only then you can really understand what's going on. You can revert things when you see that it's become unstable because maybe you overclocked it too much. Do enough testing, document, okay, which profile memory testing I used, how long did it run, can it to later assess, can it really be considered stable or not. And I did recently have the case where the RAM was overclocked. I lowered the latency pretty much, but then and the memory test actually was successful. But afterwards, I realized some strange behaviors of the whole system, and it took me quite some time to figure out it was actually the RAM, and then bring it back to upping basically the latencies again, the timings in a way that it would become stable again. If you have ever tinkered with DDR4 memory tweaking and the BIOS settings, the timings, you know what I'm talking about, that it may take ages until you really find the culprit of why it's all of a sudden no longer stable. Is it sometimes it's temperature, depends obviously on the die of your RAM and so on. But in this case, it was really interesting to see that although I didn't really think about RAM at all in changing the GPU settings and the configuration and the orientation, uh, just by having a different cable and then running into a whole lot of compatibility issues and getting unstable, getting really low performance also. Pretty interesting to see. And and yeah, so I thought that these details might help you in your quest if you're like me, interested in the inner workings of your PC and the components around it, and yeah, squeezing the best performance out of it so that maybe you can save a couple of FPS and increase the experience with your games. So yeah, thanks for watching, and hope you can benefit from anything I said. This, by the way, is the benchmark of a performance test of Passmark. It's actually also interesting because it's a good benchmark with real performance. It's pretty close. It doesn't use like user benchmark would be something that is a bit strange in how they actually rate the different performances. While Passmark actually is a renowned firm for making sure that the benchmark is stable. The rankings and so on are officially, you can check all the ratings on on their website, and you can compare what the average performance of the even your GPU, for example, is in comparison with all the other models out there in the market. And for me, it has always been a good indication of, okay, which component do I consider buying, and then really narrowing down, okay, what is the best price performance, what model should I really go for, and to really also weigh a little bit, because we are all targets and victims in many cases about the marketing engines of the different vendors and manufacturers. And well, it also sounds nice, and oh, it's all everything is for gaming, optimized for gaming, optimized for that and that and that. But in the end, obviously, you're paying potentially some premium just because you were victimized basically by those companies. So in order to stay a bit more factual and objective in the purchasing decisions, and these things, they cost real money, right? So you better think twice and get some comparisons. And for me, again, Passmark has been a good guidance, because it really is not about, okay, how many views do I get on my website if I make an article about yet another article about, oh, how fast my SSD runs and so on. And therefore, yeah, I can recommend it. There is a trial version outside. Check it out, and you can get a good view on all the components of your system individually, and you can change and you can validate the effects that maybe your tweaks are making on the system as a holistic thing, not only another time spy run just for the GPU, and you don't realize that maybe you just did something that drops the CPU performance, or has effects on the memory, and all of a sudden you get a very bad score. You don't know what it actually all about, and then you figure out that actually you just changed something in the BIOS setup mistakenly, just just reviewing it quickly and so on. So yeah, if you're interested in anything that I said in more detail, let me know, put a comment or whatnot, and then I'll try to get into a bit more detail of my journey with the hardware stuff. So, back on PCI Express 4.0 via the cable, here is a summary of my findings. PCI Express 3.0 x16 has a maximum theoretical bandwidth of 16 GB per second, while 4.0 has double at 32 GB per second. And running on PCI Express 3.0 also requires at least in my case, I'm not sure if it's really generally applicable, is that it requires the CSM module enabled, the compatibility support module in the BIOS, which then in turn will switch off the smart access memory access, which both of which, so running on 3.0 and disabling smart access memory, both have actually an impact on the performance ratings. And this explains the big degradation in my case. I did some more testing, watching really what it does, switching CSM on and off, and back on the 4.0 riser cable. And interestingly, I mean, I'm really closely back to the performance of the in 3D for sure. The 2D score is still low. I'm really not sure where this is coming from because I didn't really change anything. I had a backup of the BIOS settings and so on. So this is certainly something I want to investigate where it's coming from. But really, in real life and real usage, there is no difference tangible because 2D, I mean, it's basically outdated and not really tangible. So, but yeah, happy to be back on the old performance roughly in 3D, which is most thing used in the current games, let's say. And yeah, so that concludes for now my testing.